feel very honoured indeed to be given this award from the Royal Zoological Society of New South Wales. And I gather it reflects basically my lifetime interest in entomology and ways that I've tried to increase knowledge of the Australian insect fauna, and in particular its conservation. By way of background, I came to Australia in 1970 as an entomologist at La Trobe University, and I quickly realised how little was really known about the diversity of insects, and also how vulnerable much of it was becoming. At that time, of course, the big conservation issues included the wood chip industry, the wood chip exports, Lake Pedder, and a number of others, which were having dramatic effects on Australian ecosystems and the very poorly known fauna that they included. As an entomologist entering a university department, I also realised that my previous main interests, the systematics of two rather poorly known groups of insects, lacewings and barklice, were not likely to attract vast cohorts of graduate students, and that perhaps I should become more of a generalist rather than remain a narrow specialist. So I progressively tried to develop a wide range of insects, of interest in insects, in different taxa, in different habitats, and in particular, how their conservation could be pursued. And this award, I take it, reflects to a large extent the work which I've tried to pursue in insect conservation. My first book on that was published in the Netherlands in 1984. Not for want of trying to publish it in Australia, I published 4 leading publishers, none of whom could see a market for it and suggested that it was going to be of very little interest. And I guess that really reflected the tenor of the times. Insects were, and still remain to a large extent, the Cinderellas, the poor cousins of the more charismatic vertebrates in conservation matters. And I've tried through my writings and work to bring a wider perspective to insect conservation in Australia with a way to highlighting the plight and the unique endemic fauna that we have and the dangers, the massive array of threats that it has been undergoing with loss of habitats, invasive species, weeds, pesticides, agricultural and urban expansion, and a wide range of other threats superimposed on more natural processes, natural in inverted commas, such as climate change, all of which are affecting the Australian environment to a vast extent. So over the years, I've been fortunate enough to have worked with a very good group of graduate students in a department in which we were encouraged to follow our own interests to a large extent, and to work with a number of professional colleagues with whom I've enjoyed long and very rewarding relationships, not just in Australia, but in South Africa, Europe, North America, and other places. And I've also been very fortunate in that I've been able to travel widely to attend leading meetings, to act as an advocate for Australian insects in a wide range of fora, including the World Conservation Union, where I headed their Lepidoptera specialist group, and Invertebrate Conservation Task Force for some years. But more importantly, I've tried to write with a perspective of bringing the lessons from overseas to bear on Australian insect conservation. In other words, from lessons from the relatively well-known faunas of Western Europe and North America to our very much more poorly documented insects. And to also to publicise the Australian situations in forums overseas. In other words, to try to make Australian insects appear more significantly on the global conservation map. To this extent, I've written a series of books. The total number of books in entomology and conservation is now almost 50, many of which have been with Australian publishers, New South Wales University Press, Oxford University Press, and others, and a number of overseas ones. Most recently, I've been writing a series of books published by Springer, which have dealt with the major themes in insect conservation, And the most recent three have dealt with insect conservation in Australian forests, in Australian grasslands, and Australian inland waters, where I've tried to bring together the themes which have been developed from more intensive work overseas to apply to the fauna in Australia and the unique problems they face. Over the period of this work, which is now close to 40 years, I've been seeing great increases in interest in insect conservation in Australia. Not only are they included in state and federal legislations on the listed species, with the criteria for this becoming gradually clearer, but also the number of people who are now interested in insect conservation has increased markedly. I would like to think that I've had some small part in stimulating this interest, but it has been very rewarding to see insects gradually arrive within the mainstream of conservation, and that a number of our rarest and most unusual, unique species are indeed the focus of serious conservation programs. And also the criteria for assessing threats, for looking at insect distributions, for documenting the fauna in ways that we can use that information to promote their well-being and survival has itself been a rewarding experience. A lot of people have helped me with this. My graduate students over the years have been a key source of inspiration. I've worked with a large number of professional colleagues in Australia. I've had the privilege of working in a department, as I mentioned, for a long time, where my interests were encouraged and I was allowed to develop really what I wanted to do. And since my retirement, 10 years ago, I've been allowed to maintain an office at La Trobe through the good offices of the successive heads of department and head of school. I've also had the privilege or pleasure of a very supportive home environment. My wife, Danny, has been patient in tolerating the spread of papers onto every available surface in our house, as I now have to work mainly from home. But the most rewarding thing has really been to see the arrival of insects and their other invertebrate relatives into conservation agendas. And to that extent, I feel very privileged to be offered this award, which came completely out of the blue. And I indeed thank the Society for this recognition. I'm very grateful for it, and it's a highlight of my working career. Thank you very much.